Observation mission to the Guyana general and regional elections. It is really a valued stakeholder for us, so we thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm DK Noel, Manager Communications at the CARICOM Secretariat, and I'll moderate today's activity. Today we're joined by Chief of Mission, Ms. Josephine Tamai. She's the Chief Elections Officer in Belize. Ms. Tamai has served on several CARICOM election observation missions, including Chief of Mission to the Bahamas in 2017, Dominica in 2019, and Antigua and Barbuda in 2023, as well as serving as Deputy Chief of Mission in Guyana in 2015, and the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in 2015. The Deputy Chief of Mission to her left is Mr. Ian Hughes, he's the Supervisor of Elections of Antigua and Barbuda. Mr. Hughes recently served as Chief of Mission for the general elections of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. We're also joined by other members of the mission, the 8 members here, and the support team from the Secretariat. It was led by Assistant Secretary General of Foreign and Community Relations, Ms. Elizabeth Solomon. By way of background and context, prior to election, the mission held meetings with key stakeholders such as GCOM, government, opposition, political parties, civil society and special interest groups, media, and other local and international observer groups. On election day, the CARICOM Election Observation Mission observed the electoral process, including the preparations for the start of the polls, casting of votes, closure of the polling stations, counting of the ballots, preparation of the statement of polls, and tabulation of results. Qualitative and quantitative information regarding the voting process and the results have been collected to facilitate the preparation of an independent final report on the general and regional elections to the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. So I'll now pass you on to Mr. Mai, who will provide more information.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
And welcome. I acknowledge the presence of the media, as Geneva Election Observer Mission. I note the presence of the Commonwealth Electoral Observation Mission. I'm hoping I'm not missing any other. May I acknowledge the presence of my observer mission, my team to the back. As the chief of mission for this CARICOM Electoral Observation Mission, it is my pleasure to be joined by such a competent group of electoral experts from across the Caribbean region. Our presence here underscores our commitment to supporting democratic processes across the region. In response to an invitation from the government of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, the Caribbean Community CARICOM, through the Secretary General, Dr. Carla Barnett, mounted a 10-member CARICOM Election Observation Mission, the CEOM, to observe the general and regional elections on 1st September 2025. Members of the mission comprise electoral experts from the following 8 member states: Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Belize, Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. The CEOM is responsible for observing preparations for and the conduct of the elections. Its mandate is to provide an independent, impartial, and honest assessment of the entire electoral process, considering all factors that may impact the overall credibility and transparency of the elections. The Chief and Deputy Chief of Mission, along with the remaining team members, arrived in Guyana during the period 26 to the 28 August 2025. The CEOM consulted with a wide cross-section of the Guyanese society. This included His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Ephraim Ali, President and leader of the People's Progressive Party Civic, representatives of the Honorable Aubrey Norton, Member of Parliament, Leader of the Opposition, a Partnership for National Unity, APNU, We Invest in Nationhood, WIN, the Alliance for Change, the AFC, Assembly of Liberty and Prosperity, the ALP, and Forward Guyana Movement, the FGM. Additionally, the team attended several political meetings to gain an understanding of the political atmosphere on the ground. The team also engaged with the chairperson of the Guyana Electoral Commission, GECOM, and the Chief Elections Officer, the Commissioner of Police, Guyana Integrity Commission, the Ethnic Relations Commission, Women and Gender Equality Commission, the National Disability Commission, and various civil society institutions, including the Society Against Sexual Orientation and Discrimination, the Guyana Bar Association, Transparency International Guyana, the Kanji Community Development Council, and the Presidential Youth Advisory Council. The team also met with the United Nations Technical Team, local and international observers, and CARICOM ambassadors resident in Guyana. These meetings provided the CEOM with a general idea of the atmosphere and level of preparedness for the elections. The campaign period. Based on information from the various stakeholder consultations and media reports, campaign messaging largely focused on policy and national development. However, the campaign also included instances of personal attacks and accusations. This dynamic likely reflects the high stakes of the election and the evolving political landscape of Guyana as a developing nation. We have not received any reports of major election-related violence during the campaign period. Deployment of teams. On election day, team members were deployed to observe the elections in regions 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10. The team visited a total of 324 polling stations across the 10 regions. The team also consulted with returning officers and supernumerary returning officers, as well as the various police regional commanders. The opening of the polls. The observer team arrived at the polling stations prior to the opening of poll to observe the process. It was observed that there was adequate police presence at all these polling locations. Polling staff were present and the necessary election supplies were delivered on time, enabling polling stations to open promptly at 6 a.m. Many voters arrived just before the polls opened, and many appeared enthusiastic to cast their ballots. The CARICOM was made aware of one polling station that experienced a delay, opening at 6:40 a.m. due to the late delivery of the voting compartment. However, this delay did not appear to disfranchise any voter, as all voters who presented themselves were able to cast their ballots. The team noted the presence of at least 3 political agents in most polling stations. The required notices and instructions for electors were posted, and polling day staff diligently followed the official procedures for the opening of the poll. Overall, the polling stations visited generally opened on time, and voters were able to cast their ballots in a very peaceful and orderly manner. The voting process. At the polling locations we visited, we observed that a majority of the polling stations had a list of electors posted for voters to be able to check their names. In a few locations where the list was not displayed, some voters were unsure of their designated polling station. The CARICOM noted that this was effectively managed by the availability of information clerks who were equipped with tablets or phones to direct voters, and the option to scan a QR code for guidance. Polling staff were observed to be adequately trained, courteous, and helpful, particularly to incapacitated voters. They consistently and impartially guided voters throughout the process. While voter turnout appeared slow for a significant portion of the day, polling staff remained focused on their duties, ensuring all eligible voters who presented themselves were able to cast their ballots. The CARICOM observed some inconsistencies in the positioning of voting compartments. While GCOM had provided an official station layout, it appeared that some polling staff may have had a different interpretation of the guidelines. The CARICOM was informed that these adjustments were made in some locations to prevent the photographing of ballots, a GCOM policy, even though voters were not permitted to take their phones inside the voting compartments. Despite these variations, the voting procedures were generally conducted in accordance with the procedures and guidelines outlined by GCOM. The CARICOM also observed that some polling stations were not located on the ground floor. This presented a challenge for elderly and disabled voters, which is an important consideration for future planning. Closing of the polls. The CARICOM observed the closing of the poll at several polling stations, arriving approximately 30 minutes before the scheduled 6 p.m. closing time. The team noted that most polling stations had no voters in line. At 6 p.m., the presiding officers declared the polling stations closed. In a few instances where voters were still in line, they were permitted to cast their ballots. The CARICOM concluded that the close of poll procedures were conducted in accordance with the guidelines outlined by GCOM. Counting of the ballots. Following the conclusion of the voting, ballot boxes were opened in the presence of political party agents and observers. The ballots were then carefully counted, beginning with the general election ballots and immediately followed by the regional election ballots. Once polling staff and agents agreed on the tally, the results were recorded on the statement of poll. All parties present signed documents, and copies were provided to political party agents and posted at the polling stations as required. The CEOM is satisfied that the polling day staff follow the counting of ballot procedures and guidelines outlined by GCOM. Tabulation of results. After the counting process, presiding officers were responsible for transporting originally signed statement of polls to the respective district or supernumerary returning officer for tabulation. The CEOM notes that the tabulation process is still ongoing. The CEOM commends GCOM on the legal amendments made to enhance the integrity of the tabulation process, particularly the provision for electronic transmission and the public display of statement of polls for verification. These measures are critical for ensuring transparency and accountability. Stakeholder observations and recommendations. Based on consultations, the CEOM noted the following several key observations and recommendations from various stakeholders. The voters list. A primary concern raised by a majority of stakeholders was the perceived bloated nature of the voters list. GCOM informed that while Guyanese who reside overseas are not included in the national census, the law does not currently authorize the Commission to remove their names from the voters list of electors, as they retain the legal requirement to return and vote. The removal of deceased persons. Some stakeholders indicated that names of deceased individuals remain on the list from the last elections. The CEOM was informed that in addition to the General Registrar Office, the Ministry of Health and the police are now required to provide GCOM with information on deceased persons to assist in the timely removal of these names from the list of electors. Biometrics. The introduction of biometrics was highlighted as a pressing need that could assist in mitigating the potential for impersonation and double voting. GCOM's composition. Concerns were also expressed regarding the current composition of GCOM. Many stakeholders suggested that independent commissioners should also be appointed and that a time limit should be added to the period of their appointments. Communication. Stakeholders, including media representatives, reported continued difficulties in obtaining timely information from GCOM, which can hinder their ability to provide accurate and prompt information to the public. Campaign financing. The lack of a clear framework for campaign financing regulations was also a concern. Stakeholders noted the need for such a framework to be established to ensure a more level playing field. Overall impression and commendations. The CEOM is of the view that on election day, voters were able to exercise their franchise in a peaceful and orderly manner without significant incident. The team observed no signs of intimidation, harassment, or campaigning intended to influence or obstruct the democratic process. Polling day staff performed their duties in a professional manner and are to be commended. Similarly, the police maintained law and order at the polling stations with extreme professionalism in their interactions with electors and various political stakeholders. We wish to congratulate the Guyana Elections Commission, the Chief Elections Officer, and all polling staff. Despite concerns raised prior to Election Day regarding a potential shortage of staff, all polling stations the team visited had a full complement of professional and courteous workers. They efficiently managed the process, even though some, including presiding officers, were working for the first time. Congratulations are also in order for the political parties, their agents, their supporters, and all voters for the peaceful and orderly way they conducted themselves on Election Day. We urge all Guyanese to remain calm, peaceful, and patient while awaiting the official results of the general and regional elections. The relevant authorities must be allowed the space to carry out their duties thoroughly and transparently, now more than ever. Guyanese must stand together and put country first. Remember that the strength of the nation lies in its unity, resilience, and commitment to the democratic process. The integrity of your elections is essential to the future of Guyana. In conclusion, it is our view that the will of the people of Guyana will be accepted and respected. This interim statement provides an initial assessment based on the observations of our team. A final report will be submitted to the Secretary General of CARICOM in the coming weeks, outlining our full findings and recommendations. CARICOM reaffirms its commitment to continue supporting Guyana's democratic journey and its pursuit of a peaceful, unified, and prosperous future for all Guyanese. The COM expresses gratitude to all individuals and organizations who took the time to meet with us. We also extend our appreciation to the Secretary General and staff of the CARICOM Secretariat for their unwavering support to this mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chief of Mission. If you have any questions, could you just turn on your mic, say your name and your media house, and you could proceed with your questions.
John Marshall, News Source. You spoke about the concerns raised during your consultations with stakeholders regarding the list, the size of the list, and the presence of the names of deceased persons on those lists. Based on your observation, you say that there were enough safeguards in place to prevent voter impersonation. And what would be the mission's recommendation with regards to addressing the issue, because this has been a recurring issue of the list in its sense, and also the issue of campaign financing?
Okay. With regards to the removal of deceased persons, it maintains in other countries as well that the electoral bodies are obligated to ensure that the list is as clean as possible. And so when it comes to the case of Guyana, we were informed that the last census, well, the official census which was published was in 2012. Yeah. And so the population stood at a little bit over 800,000, and the voters list has over 700,000 persons. And so we can see from those numbers that the list is high. GCOM informed us that persons not residing in Guyana cannot just simply be removed from the voters list. And so in terms of that, one of the recommendations in terms of cleaning of the voters list would be they could either look at maybe a possible re-registration of voters, Also, they could also do more work in terms of getting deceased persons off the list. Because like I mentioned earlier, the complaints were that despite information being sent to GCOM, some of those names still remain on the list. I will tell you that coming from electoral management bodies, you have to go through a process to remove those names from the list. You could imagine removing a list without verifying that that person is actually dead and that person turns up to vote on election day, what that would create, right? And so an extensive exercise needs to be done when it comes to removing deceased persons. But I also want to encourage citizens of Guyana as well, that if you have persons in your family who are deceased, to take in the information to GCOM's office and to assist in terms of that process. That will help in terms of trying to clean that list. But as I mentioned, a re-registration exercise would also help in that process.
And campaign financing.
When it comes to the issue of campaign financing, we were informed that there is a lack of such regulations in Guyana. And so it is an issue that needs to be addressed. Again, it is something that the political will has to be there to introduce those legislations. It is a challenge, especially in Caribbean countries. However, steps have been made in some countries to move forward with those processes. And so I want to encourage Guyana to look at those countries. For example, we have Jamaica, who has moved towards some form of campaign financing legislation. And so that will level the playing field, because some of the complaints coming from the political parties was that money was the issue. Some political parties claim that they had to raise funds. So look at who raised the most funds. But again, the campaign financing regulations, if that is put in place, then that will assist.
Good afternoon. Samuel Sudan, NCN News. You made reference to the inconsistencies with the voting compartments and different interpretation of that. How many reports did you receive from the team, and what would be your recommendation to address this issue?
Well, in almost all the regions that we observe, we observe this inconsistency. We know that it is the policy of GCOM that the voting compartments should be turned in the manner whereby you could see the body of the voter, and that is to avoid persons taking photographs. And so it seems as if though there was some miscommunication from some of the poll day workers by not having them consistent in all areas. More emphasis would be needed in terms of training when it comes to that area, because we all know, and even today, we would sit here, and by the time we leave from here, we're in the same room, and some people will leave with a different interpretation. And so more training in that area would definitely need to be done to ensure that the policies are followed.
Good afternoon, Tamika Guyana Times. I'm sorry if I missed it, but can you say what regions across the country you visited, and if you have a count of how many polling stations you visited?
Okay, I mentioned that we visited regions 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10. And we visited a total of 324 polling stations across these regions.
Ma'am, could you say what was the mission told with respect to the alleged abuse of state resources? And secondly, what have you been told with respect to the perhaps high number of persons from the Commonwealth and Venezuelans who may have been allowed to vote? And have you been told at all what are your views or perspectives?
When it comes to the abuse of state resources, yes, we were told that there was abuse. And so in our final report, we're going to report more on that because we need to obtain evidence of such before we could make any comments on that. But we were told that persons were using helicopters and other things to campaign, right? But like I said, once we get those documentations, then we'll be able to report on that more in our final. In regards to the high number of persons, and like you mentioned, you said Venezuelans who are voting. When it comes to the laws, Commonwealth citizens are allowed to register, right? We don't have a number. We were never told the number of Commonwealth citizens who reside in Guyana. But the law is that once they reside for a certain period, then legally they are eligible to get registered and to vote. Similarly, in terms of the Venezuelans, we don't have a figure, but we would have to look further into that to see if indeed Venezuelans actually voted or if they actually have citizenship in Guyana for them to qualify to vote in Guyanese elections.
And were there actually concerns raised about these two categories of persons? And secondly, what do you believe can be the regional standard for the use of state resources for electioneering purposes, not confined necessarily to Guyana?
To answer your first question, no. It wasn't raised on election day about Commonwealth persons and Venezuelans voting. Like I said, in order for their name to be on the voters list, it should be that they are qualified to vote in Guyana. In terms of use of state resources, it's something that we know, and it's, like I said, it's not only in Guyana, but the resources belongs to the state. And you find that there are always allegations that these resources are still being used to do campaigning. And so my recommendation would be that there would need to be a cutoff point when an election is called so that persons who are still basically in power don't have access to these resources because they actually belong to the people of the country.
A cutoff point by way of legislation or policy or regulations?
It would have to be by way of legislation.
Thank you.
Stefan, again, you spoke about calls for the independent commissioners to be appointed to the Ghana Elections Commission and for them to be appointed for limited periods of time. What would be what would be your recommendation? Would you embrace such a call, given the challenges faced by some of the smaller parties, some of whom said that they felt unrepresented at the level of the commission?
Well, my view on that would be, I'm not certain that when it comes to the commission that it should only be political parties involved. Because at some point in time, some of those political parties don't exist anymore. And so you would want to have independent organizations being a part of the commission, because the complaint has always been that when it's basically the two major political parties, then that is where representation stems and the other parties don't really have a voice. And so I don't believe that we should just limit it to political parties appointing persons to be on a commission. In a lot of the other regions, the time limit would be about 5 years, which normally would be like a term of government. What I would recommend that you don't use the number of years for any government, so that whenever a government changes, you still have some persons on those commissions who can carry the work forward, because it should not be about a government. It should be about the interests of the country.
how soon the election observer mission would submit its final report, and would the mission be staying right through until the results are declared, the national results are declared?
Unfortunately, based on our mandate, we leave the country tomorrow, and hence the reason we need to have this press conference today, even though we know tabulation is still ongoing. It's not to say that we won't be continuously following up. So to answer your question, we actually leave tomorrow.
The report would be published. The final report?
In terms of the final report, in the next 3 weeks, the report will be handed over to the Secretary General of CARICOM, after which they will do their review and they will then make the reports. I must say that now CARICOM has committed to making reports public.
Just a follow-up to my colleague's question on the current consensus mechanism in GCOM, the Carter formula. Are you saying that there shouldn't be any political appointees? None at all?
No, I'm not saying there should be, because they actually have an interest. But it's not to say that it only has to be the two major political parties. But you would want to have an independent commission with at least the majority, so that whenever decisions are taken, it is not skewed to a specific political party.
Are there any specific recommendations? Because we have the chair, we have the 3 opposition and the 3 government-appointed commissioners. Any specific recommendation in terms of that formula, change in that formula?
Well, at this point, we will definitely be looking to see some of the best practices across, and then we will put those recommendations in our final report.
I'm not seeing any questions online, so if there are no further questions, Madam Chief, if you have any closing statements, you may make it now, or we can end the press conference.
Once again, I just want to thank you all for coming to this press conference, and to wish the people of Guyana all the best. I know that Guyanese people, we had a warm welcome, and I must say thank you all for inviting us to observe elections in this country. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for attending. I echo the Chief's comments, and we look forward to seeing your reports and your coverage. Very much.